My name's Rick Meredith and I'm the Medical Director of the Trust. I'm a GP by background and I joined the Trust several years ago. Before I became the Medical Director, I worked on the wards as a ward doctor, and that was my plan in coming to work for DCHS. I wanted to continue my career with care of the elderly patients, and I therefore went to work on the wards at Walton Hospital. I want to tell you about a situation that occurred a few years ago, which I think for me really encompasses what the duty of candour really means in the terms of how we care for our patients. During my time on the ward, an elderly gentleman was admitted from Chesterfield Royal Hospital. I've forgotten the exact reason why he came, but he was a lovely gentleman, and he had in the past been a physical instructor, PT instructor in the Royal Air Force. He used to very much enjoy telling me about that when we did our ward rounds. And the other thing he loved telling me about was a holiday that he went on where he walked across the Lake District, and he had a car that followed him and took his bags to and from different places so he wouldn't have to carry them. And after a few days, the nurses pointed out to me that his memory tended to fluctuate. And I had noticed when I'd been talking to him that sometimes he could remember exactly about his holiday, and other days he really couldn't remember telling me about it at all. So when we looked into it further, it transpired this gentleman had a fall. He was a widowed gentleman, and he'd been with one of his friends and had been watching a football match on television. And as he walked back home in the rain, he'd slipped and banged his head. And it turned out the gentleman had a subdural hematoma, which is a blood clot in the lining of the brain, and he was taking warfarin, which is a drug that thins your blood. So in fact he was in a fairly precarious position, having had this bleed and also being on the warfarin. A further complicating factor for this poor gentleman was that because of the scanner being broken down at Chesterfield Royal where he'd had his fall, he'd had to go to Nottingham for his scan, and the results of the scan hadn't been transmitted from Nottingham to Chesterfield, and therefore hadn't been transmitted from Chesterfield through to us at DCHS. I decided that we should stop his warfarin, but then for some reason I made a really serious mistake. I stopped his warfarin and prescribed aspirin. I stopped the warfarin because of the bleed, and I was a bit concerned in case this gentleman might need to go and have further neurosurgery carried out in Sheffield, and clearly I should not have started the aspirin. Lo and behold, the next day when I spoke to the neurosurgeons in Sheffield, they said we could have taken this gentleman straight across because we'd reversed the warfarin with some vitamin K, but we can't now because you've given him some aspirin, and he will therefore have to wait a further 7 to 10 days for that aspirin to come out of his system before he can have his neurosurgical procedure. This was obviously a very significant mistake. At this point in time I was brand new to DCHS and really didn't quite know what to do. I was very quickly told I needed to put a Datix in. I didn't know what Datix was, but I learnt and put a Datix form in. But very quickly I understood that I needed to talk to the patient and indeed to his extended family. So I went and spoke to the gentleman. I was very clear that he understood what I was saying, but he was very keen that I spoke to his family. So I did arrange to see his family that evening. We went through what had happened very carefully with the family, and the following day I wrote them a letter which I sent to them, which explained it in detail. I suppose in my mind I was half expecting a complaint, and the complaint never came, but what did come back was a very kind card saying thank you very much for being so courteous, telling us exactly what had gone wrong and explaining it so carefully to us. So I think for me this really does encompass the duty of candour. Where we do something to a patient, or where our care compromises a patient's health or well-being, or where things don't go quite according to plan, I think it's really important we are very open and transparent with patients and carers so they can fully understand the implications of what's happened and understand the reason why it's happened and what measures we're going to take to stop it happening again.